as she mentioned, I spent 12 years in the U.S. Coast Guard doing search and rescue operations and disaster response. So basically Hurricane Katrina, the BP oil spill, the Fukushima response. And it should come as a surprise to no one who's ever done a product launch that running a disaster and running a product launch are pretty similar. So this presentation actually came about because when I was at Oracle, as the VP of Marketing Operations. Now, please don't flinch when I say that I was in marketing. I know many of you will go, oh God, marketers. But my job was to be the bridge between the product teams and the marketing teams to make sure that the marketing teams understood what was going on product and they were supporting them appropriately. Because if you launch a product without really good marketing, there's a chance people aren't going to know it happened or it just won't have the big impact. I was explaining how I wanted to build the new launch operation programs for Oracle, and one of my peers said, "You can't look at the whole ocean." That's probably the worst analogy you can throw at someone who is in the U.S. Coast Guard. Just going to say, don't tell me nautical analogies, especially not this one, because we can, in fact, look at the whole ocean. It's called AIS. And as crazy it might sound, launching products, the process I built for the AWS Launch Operations Program and then at Oracle actually followed the system that the U.S. Coast Guard uses for bringing ships from the high seas into port. Now, when you're looking at AIS, it's the Automated Identification System. So think of your launch as a ship. When you're out on the high seas, think of your product as a ship. When your product is out on the high seas, the teams are working away at building and doing building the product, testing it, doing all of these things, right? But teams outside of your ship still need to know generally what direction you're going in, who's on the team, so who's on your ship, who's driving the ship, and when you think that ship is going to come into port. Same idea with a launch. You know who the leader of the team is, you know which direction you're working in, and you should generally have a good idea of when you're going to be ready to launch. But here's the thing. As you get closer to shore in the Coast Guard, or actually this is globally, this isn't just the US Coast Guard, whenever a ship gets closer to shore, the rules of the road come into play. And there are more things you need to know and more people you need to talk to in order to bring your ship into port. Well, similar, your launch, as it's getting closer, you're going to need to talk to potentially your security teams or your Q&A team or your marketers, your lawyers. There's a whole group of people that you're going to need to engage with as a product manager that you might not have engaged with up until that point. So as you see here in the Coast Guard, the further from shore, the less rules, the closer you get in, the more people you have to talk to. Not dissimilar. As at AWS, as we were heading into launches, you would find that you had to talk to the lawyers to make sure that your name was trademarked the right way. You had to talk to your marketing team because they all had their own timelines to get things done. If any of you read the AWS blog, you had to talk to Jeff Barr. He was the best beta tester on the face of the planet. He's the VP of evangelism. You'd talk to him throughout the whole process, but you better let him know when that launch was coming so he could have your blog post ready. So, when you're out to sea, there's fairly few rules. 1, don't run into anyone. 2, don't throw anyone overboard. 3, try not to hit any whales. And 4, don't pollute. But when you're getting closer, as you can see here, there's a lot more rules that come into play. So think about it this way. You're all the way out at the beginning, and as you get closer, different countries' laws come into play. Well, as you get closer to launch, different groups' operations come into play. So this is what I just talked about. Also, just for fun, the last port I managed in the Coast Guard, that was how many vessels per year we brought in. And the fun fact here is that number, 1,867, in AWS, that was almost the number of products and feature launches and region launches I did in my last year as the head of AWS Launch Operations. So as the head of AWS Launch Operations, I used this port call style system to launch 1,866 features, services, or regions in the year of 2019. So product launches are always going to be more complicated than you expect. You think it's going to go smoothly. You think you've planned for everything. You probably haven't. Most companies are not big enough to have a dedicated launch operations team. So for example, at AWS, I was the head of launch operations. And then shortly after that, I got promoted and I was the global head of disaster response. Again, see the similarity between the two. And I ended up running the COVID response for AWS, which pretty much burned me out. And that's when I actually departed AWS, was the end of 2020. But it's always harder than you expect, and you need guide rails for people to hang on to so that if something falls off, they know what comes next. So the bridge is going to be you. You're going to be the bridge at most companies between your product team and everybody else. Now, again, like I said, AWS and those don't, they had a launch person like me, and I had a team of 11 that worked with the other teams. And when I was there was 160 to 167 product teams. Your company's probably not that big. So you're going to have to find a way to maximize your ability to run a launch operation with a lot of different teams where you might not be able to tell them what to do. You just have to negotiate. Ever try to tell a lawyer that their timeline doesn't work? They don't really listen. So you need to know who you need to make connections with and do it quickly. So the reason I say why not both here is because the question always comes to me of, well, we use Agile and what you're describing is a waterfall method. Here's the nice thing. This method that I used, like I said, at other companies, including AWS, allows you to maintain your Agile with your product team while using a more cohesive system with other teams that might not use Agile, because a lot of marketing teams, for example, don't, because that's not the way their business works. So what this allows you to do is basically have one common operating picture where everyone can plug into the system without damaging their own process. What you do on your ship is what you do on your ship. So these are some examples of the checklists we use in the Coast Guard. So I basically took some of these and repurposed them to run launch ops. So what happens when you're doing a disaster or port operations is everyone panics, everyone's tired, everyone hasn't slept enough. You might be slightly hungover, depending on how bad the disaster is. So these checklists allow us to make sure that everyone on the team, or if, let's say for some reason I got sick and the person who worked right next to me needed to take over my work, they can without missing a step. That's a key thing, because we are living through a society right now where burnout is a major problem and people get overwhelmed and people get tired or people quit. These sheets, or they're called quick response cards. A quick response card or a process like this where you have designated out your timelines so that everyone can see who's doing what and how long it should take. If all of a sudden you get sick or something happens and you're not there, someone else can pick that sheet up and keep going. So this is where the question always comes, okay, but what did you use? At AWS, we use Salesforce, actually. We were using Salesforce. At Oracle, we use Jira. Works for both, as long as you have a ticketing system. Now, for a little bit at AWS, we then moved to using Honeycode just to see if we could build our own platform. One of the key functions of this, though, was not just having the list. See those flags on the side? Basically, what the system has to do, and if you can automate this, you're golden, and Jira and Salesforce both allow you to automate. Let's say you're working on your product and you go to beta and something doesn't work, so you're pushing back your launch date. Having a system like this, you've got a green light, oh shoot, something went wrong. Well, the way I have it set up in our systems was that if something went wrong at the product team, or it didn't pass a security check or a pen test or anything else, if something went red, it automatically notified every ticket, every group downstream to let them know there was a delay so that they could load balance. As you can imagine, when you're managing 160 different product teams that did product launches, that happened a lot. And the marketing team supported all of the product teams. So if all of a sudden product A is delayed by 6 weeks, that means that they should pivot their focus from product A to product B, which was still on time and would now be coming out before product A. So by doing these sorts of cascading ticket systems, you can actually help other teams optimize, and you don't have to end up sending 180 emails. How many times have you been working on a product and there's a delay and you have to email a whole bunch of people and try not to forget someone that there was going to be a delay, or that there was a major process change, or that the product name had changed, anything like that? And if you miss one person, it can mess up the launch. So you need to determine which groups are critical. So one of the things on the quick response card is you can see there at the one on the top, it actually, and the one in the middle, it actually talks about who you're supposed to be talking to and when. And so you need to determine that before you're doing your launches. So if you don't have a process in place where you have listed out every step that goes into a launch, you probably should, because you want all of your launches to go well. And so you need to be able to learn from what happened before. Well, if you're not documenting what happened before, you're not going to learn from it. These allow you to document, and they allow you to go backwards and look. Other fun fact, because there's been a lot of discussion about AI, is that with the progress in machine learning and AI, you can actually use this information to feed into a system and determine, okay, this team said that getting something done is going to take 2 weeks. Historically, they take 4. By doing that, you'll actually be able to, over time, note, oh, hey, you know what? This team promises this, but they've missed the mark 90% of the time. We need to add some padding in there because they're probably going to miss again. So here's an example of a Jira flow. I will say I've had some problems with the Jira system lately because it's gotten really clunky and the interface isn't the best. So you've got to be really careful. Keep it to a minimum. That's the other thing that's great about these checklists. They seem like there's a lot, right? They seem like there's a lot of stuff on them. There actually isn't. It's very carefully curated. Everyone at your company is going to think their particular baby, the thing they own, belongs on that launch checklist. It might, but it might not. So as you're working through, you need to sit and seriously talk to your team and your supporting teams, what actually belongs on this checklist and what doesn't. Keep it simple. The more bells and whistles you add to whichever system you choose, be it Salesforce, an Excel spreadsheet actually works. At an AI startup I worked for, I used an Excel spreadsheet for this because the company was small enough. As long as you know how to use the spreadsheet, it would automatically, if a date moved, everything underneath it would go yellow, so that the other teams who could see that spreadsheet knew what was happening. But whatever system you use to make one of these workflows, you've got to keep it as simple as possible. The more bells and whistles you add, the more additional groups you add, the more likely you are to have a failure. Make sure it's scalable. So this is a super important one because you might be at a startup or you might be at a company that's real small right now. But the process you build when you're small needs to be able to grow with the company. And I say this because when I started at AWS, I was actually the head of blog operations. I founded the Coast Guard's social media program. I was actually the first blogger for any U.S. armed service. I also launched the Coast Guard's first mobile app, a boating safety app for the public. Well, thing is, when I got to AWS, shortly after that, we crashed S3. So basically, I'd been at AWS for 6, 7 months, and AWS broke the internet. 50 of the top 100 web pages went down, and everyone's running around. What do we do? I said, well, let's use our crisis plan. They're like, our what? Which surprised me because remember, this is 2017, and the fact that AWS didn't have a crisis plan for this sort of thing kind of blew my mind. Well, what happened from there was the VP of marketing realized I didn't panic when things were on fire, because to me, I was used to fires being literal. And so instead, he was like, you know what? You're really good at this process building. I want you to run launch operations, because the launch ops they had originally built wasn't scaling. It was built on Ruby on Rails. It was a very clunky process. It involved too much manual input, and it had gotten a lot of chuff, a lot of extra stuff thrown into it over the years. And it had failed. It had broken. And what I mean by that was at reInvent, the biggest event of the year, there were system failures. People weren't notified of when they should publish the web pages. So we had a lot of cause of errors because things were kind of falling off. So essentially, the car had started going fast enough that the old wheels weren't working. So he looked at me and says, I want you to rebuild this. You know all the teams that are involved, build it from the ground up. And that's what I did. The process I built, I left AWS in 2020. The process I built is still the process they use now. And I've been gone, obviously, for 3 years. To me, that's one of my proudest moments of my career is if after 3 years after I'm gone, you still haven't broken the process I built it the right way. So don't box yourself in. Don't think when you're building your product plans and because you're going to launch this product. Well, what happens after this product? You might move on to another product. Or maybe your product's going to have feature updates. You need to be able to replicate this again and again and minimize burnout, right? But what happens if it goes completely crazy and the whole world wants this product? How are you going to scale up to meet your customers? So as you're building, think about scale. Process where you document everything out will allow you to know, hey, we need this much time to do product testing. Well, the more complex the product becomes, the more complex the testing becomes, and you need to expand that out, okay? Be realistic. What will actually keep your launch from happening? This is one that a lot of people trip up on because they want everything shiny, everything perfect. There's going to come a point in your business where you have to stop iterating and you have to launch. So be realistic. What will keep your launch from happening? What will damage the customer experience? These two core questions were the first question I used to ask any new product team the first time they met with my team. And the reason was then my team, as the launch ops team, could keep an eye on the answers they gave for these two. And if they started wandering, real quick, I can see some of you, most of you. Raise your hand if you started on a product and the scope expanded so fast that you kind of wanted to strangle the rest of the team. Yeah. Scope creep, it's real. Documenting on a checklist and documenting with the style that the Coast Guard uses. One of the things is when a ship is coming into port, we know what's on board. Fun fact, just because I like giving out fun facts, did you know that if you have enough bananas or avocados in a container box, they actually ping as radioactive? You want to know if there's bananas on board, so when your Geiger counter goes off, you know you're not being exposed and about to turn into the Incredible Hulk. It's just some bananas, okay? But what happens if the team has completely changed and they're not bringing bananas in anymore? They're now bringing in coconuts. Coconuts are not radioactive. And if the team's like, wait a minute, what's going on? There's a lot of confusion for the team down the street, okay? So with these checklists, by doing it in a cohesive way where everyone gets what in the military and various first responder services we call the common operating picture, you can prevent that confusion from happening. How many of you have ever had a product team, not a product team, how many of you have ever had marketers who wrote their marketing copy based on the original idea of what the product was going to be and not what the product ended up doing? Yeah. A checklist like this and keeping documentation in this style of flow can make sure that the marketing team keeps up to date because they will have a place to go to look for stuff without getting in your way. I remember one of the biggest issues between the product marketers and the product managers when I was at AWS and also when I was at Oracle was a lot of times the marketers are, and I say this as someone who's worked in marketing, a pain in the ass because they're constantly asking you questions and asking for more. Having a checklist like this, especially if you start including links or updates, means that they can self-serve and kind of get out of your way. And then if they don't understand something, they can reach out to you, go, hey, I already looked at the checklist and it says that you're going to be about 2 weeks behind. Is that because of a major product change? Is there something I should know? As opposed to when you're panicking that, oh gosh, we're going to miss our deadline. Oh, right, I should probably email marketing is not anyone's first thought. So these are the first 2 questions I always ask. And if you're building out a launch process, you need to think about these. So ready for launch. Watch out for fluff. That's that scope creep. That's the people coming and going. So for example, you don't necessarily need to have the social media team, the blog team, the podcast team all as their own line, right? You could just say digital marketing. I strongly advise you keep email and digital marketing separate, but that way you're not looking at 4 additional groups. It's like, hey, digital marketing as a whole takes XYZ amount of time. Now at AWS, we did have to break those teams out because they owned different parts of the process. So AWS had different Twitter accounts and the blog was its own thing. So we did break them out. But for the smaller companies and companies that aren't, AWS or Oracle sized, you can just have digital marketing and give their SLA. How long does it take? One thing I don't have on here, which I'll have to remember for next time, make sure you work backwards. This is a very Amazonian thing for me to say, but if your launch date is December 15th and you know you want to have this in the hands of the customer on December 15th, that's the date that goes at the bottom, launch, right? And then you work backwards. Okay, well, I know it takes the blog team 2 weeks to get a blog post written and reviewed. Okay, 2 weeks back. Okay, now I know that the security team needs to do this before the blog team. So, okay, this many weeks back from there. Oh, wait, we should probably involve the lawyers sooner because we need to do a trademark on our name, involve them up here. So that's, pick what your launch date is and work backwards as you're filling out the form. But for building the form, you can think forwards. You can think, okay, I'm building a product and before it goes to market, I need to make sure that the lawyers talk to it. We get our testers in place. We get our media, our marketers in place. Is this going to be, it'll be a press release. You can work forwards when you're building the check sheet. But when you're using the check sheet, you flip it. This is the launch date I want. Now, if you're automating it the way I did in Salesforce for AWS or in Honeycode for AWS, you can basically put in, here's my launch date, and it auto-populated everyone else's dates. So the marketing team didn't need to decide when they were going to do it. It was already there. Keep it simple. Automate when you can. Communicate. Fun fact, it doesn't matter how good a form you build, there are going to be people who just don't read it. That's not a surprise. So another nice thing about this form is accountability. This is where I say the quiet part out loud. This form allows you, when someone tries to throw you under the bus for something, to go, right here it said we needed this from you by this date. Were you not checking this? Most people don't want to say that part out loud, but the accountability that a check sheet and a flow chart, the way we did it in the Coast Guard, allows you to hold others accountable without being a complete jerk about it because it's in the system. And then the last thing is customers first. The reason running things like we run a port call, the reason you want to run things this way is because it allows you to replicate and improve with a way you can go back and check how it happened. So instead of just running every product launch like it's the first time you've done one, you can go, okay, this time we ran things this way and there were problems here, here, and here. Let's address those and adjust it for the next time we do it. Okay, cool. Adjust it for the next time we do it. Okay, now we need to grow. Running it this way instead of just kind of playing, musical chairs is a way that you can consistently improve your operations or work to scale when you go from, when I started Launch Ops, it was 115 products to 167 in 3 years. Okay. All right. So that was where I was at. So I think I'm pretty much on time. Let's see how I do. 4 minutes early. All right. So I think now is when we're taking Q&A.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anna. you're actually a bit early, which is great.
I talk.
Let's give Anna a hand first. Exactly. Awesome. Any questions in the audience? Very hard to see you, so you need to raise your hand up. There you go. We have a mic and a box to throw, but we don't want to throw it at you. We don't need to.
So I work in a large organization that has very few processes in place. And so I have both the complexity of the size of the organization and the fact that there is nothing like this that exists for launching the products that we're building into our users.
Yep.
So how would you go about understanding exactly what should be in this checklist, what should be in the form, and all of the stakeholders that need to be involved, and then assigning them SLAs when they've never done that before?
First of all, it's painful. So basically, have you done you've already done product launches with this group, right?
Yeah.
So go back through and figure out, okay, here's all the pieces. First, you got to gather the pieces. So look at the historicals. Here's all the different pieces we used last time. Okay. Put them kind of in some semblance of an order. And then take a really good look at it with the right people in the room, which is usually the product team, and all the stakeholders, and go, okay, did we actually touch on everything? Are we missing anything from this group? You will find usually you are, because not every launch uses every process. But essentially what you want to do is you want to gather all the pieces. Once you've gathered all the pieces, then you go, okay, and you go to each team and say, how long does it take you to do this thing? Avoid saying you're assigning them SLAs, because they'll feel like you're taking control of their process and they will get real grumpy. But ask, how long does it take you? That's when you can start moving things around in your cascading order of like, oh, you know what? I thought it took a lot less time to get this part done. It takes more time. Let's move it higher in the stream, right? So essentially, historical, go gather, double check it, make sure you have everything, ask about their SLAs, get it lined up, and then review it with everyone and say, hey, here's what we've done historically. Does this look right? And where can we optimize? It sounds really rudimentary, but then from there, you could just keep building. So that's how I've done it. And that's how I did it at AWS.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, there's a hand right up there. I can see it.
I'm glad you can, because I can.
Hi there. Thanks for the talk. So our team have a dedicated PMM and a project marketing manager, all of that stuff. They kind of relay, it's really weird to hear yourself, sorry. They kind of relay all the stuff to the sales and marketing and all the other teams, content team, design. But we as PMs, we have to vet like 99% of everything. And that takes a huge amount of time, especially when we're looking at like blog posts for, these are the blog posts that we're going to do for the next 4 weeks. And these are the socials. And these are the trainings we got to do for sales and indirect and whatever. How do you cut that time? How do you cut that time for PMs to validate that, yes, these guys got it right? Thanks.
Yep, no problem. That is a tough one, and it always depends on your PMM and their depth of knowledge. So some PMMs I've worked with have such a good depth of knowledge that they had built the trust with their product team where their review time was shorter. A good thing to do is, as you are working through the product build, as you are working through it, start talking to them early and be very specific in what you want to see in the marketing. In other words, don't expect the PMM to know exactly what will delight the user. They might not, especially on a new product. But as you're building it, your team knows what their goal is. So one of the things is usually when I would build these forms, I'd give the product team some core questions. What is the end user going to get? What will delight them? Those sorts of things. Because if you pre-answer some of the questions of what you're aiming for, the PMM will know, oh, the user's going to want to know about this, and they can pre-build that into the marketing. So you're pre-feeding them information as opposed to going around with them at the end. So get the questions from the PMM very early, because there's standard things that people use in marketing. Why would you want to buy this? What problem does it solve? That sort of thing. So this is where the AWS process kind of makes it easier, because before you launch any product at Amazon, you actually have to write a 6-page document that's a narrative about what the product will do, and the PMM lives off that document. So without making everyone basically write college essays for every product you launch, which, trust me, after grad school was a lot, a simplified form where you answer the basic marketing questions can help cut the time by about half, because you've already given them what you believe the key messages for your product will be. So they're not pulling it out of thin air. And then this, a flow style like this can also help keep the fire lit under them, because how many times have you sent something back to marketing and it sits for like a week before they respond because they're working on other stuff? So pre-questions, having clear communication at the very beginning of what the goals are, and then kind of basically feeding the beast with updating your sheets is the way we're able to cut a lot of that time in half. Did that help? Okay.
I'm pretty sure Anna will stick around
Yes.
after that. Big hand again for you. Thank you,
you.
Anna.